matter of fact here as we keep this thing rolling. Before we get into predictions, though, I would be remiss if we did not talk about the stormy conditions that happened in Durham, North Carolina last night, and that was Duke handling business over Clemson. Final score was 28-7, and there's a lot to make here about Clemson, so we will talk about that here in just a second. I want to make sure we give Duke their flowers, though, because last night was not Duke just kind of finding a way to figure it out at the end and get it done and shock the country with a last-second field goal. Like, Duke dominated. Yeah, Clemson had their fair share of mistakes, but Duke handled business. Like 28-7, that's a leave no doubt kind of score. That's a run-it-up, leave no doubt. Remember the Titans special, if you will. There was nothing fluky about last night. Duke was the bully. Riley Leonard, if you didn't know about him before last night, the entire country knows about him now. The NFL draft circles love him. He was dynamic on the ground. He did a lot with his arm. It's hard to say anything negative about Duke. And right now, I think we got to look at Duke and say, okay, well, what are they in the ACC? And I don't want to overreact and overproject because it is just week one. But you win 9 games a year ago under Mike Elko with Riley Leonard playing quarterback again for you this year. So there's some continuity there on the offensive side of the football. They looked tough on defense last night. Look at the rest of their schedule. They got some games there with some juice. You got Notre Dame. I know it's not an ACC game, but still, like, that game got a whole lot more interesting September 30th. You go to Tallahassee in October 21st. That game has a lot more juice now based on what happened last night. We're not going to overproject, but when you beat the big dog in the conference, we're going to give you some shine, and Duke did just that. Duke did it just that last night. Now, the story everyone's talking about and deserves to be talked about and is a little bit concerning right now is what's going on in Clemson, South Carolina. And you're hearing a lot of this morning. You're hearing a lot of, well, that's what Dabo gets not going to the portal. That's what Dabo, hey, the game caught up with him. He did not evolve, and he's got to use the portal. That's why they lost last night. A sentiment within that, I think, is true. Not that they lost last night because they didn't use the portal. I don't think that's true. But there's an evolution that probably has to take place in Clemson, South Carolina with acquiring talent via the portal. That's my opinion. I don't think that's what you point to last night, though. Because Duke isn't a team that just went and ravaged the transfer portal and went crazy and overhauled their roster and somehow found a way to be an enormously better team because of what they did through the portal. Duke took 7 transfers this past transfer portal cycle. 3 of those cats were from the FCS level. 2 of them were from the Ivy League. Shout out to the Ivy League. 3 of those cats were from the Power 5 level. So I'm not saying they didn't make an impact, but are you saying that Duke wins the football game because they took 7 transfers last night? I don't think so. The concern for me is Clemson and the way they have recruited. Now let me finish here. I'm not saying they haven't recruited well. I'm saying the transfer portal, and Andy Staples in his live reaction last night did a phenomenal job addressing this. The transfer portal is a tool for you to use that helps you correct recruiting mistakes. Like, it can be the remedy for whenever you look at your depth chart and say, this kid isn't what we thought he would be, or they fit differently than we thought they would. Let's go get a pass catcher. Let's go get a defensive lineman, like kind of fill in the blank for what your need is there. But for Clemson to say we're not going to use the transfer portal and then to lose to a team like Duke, a team they have consistently out-recruited year in and year out, my question isn't around the portal for Clemson. My question is around how they've built the roster. And I have more thoughts on Clemson, what they'll be the rest of the year in a second. Newsflash, I'm not selling my Clemson stock. But last night, I didn't see a team that was like out-personneled or out-talented. I saw a team in Clemson that was not dynamic. And that's kind of the way I feel about Clemson offensively. I think they'll eventually get back on the right track. Now, what that looks like, who knows? I think Garrett Riley is there for a reason. But you could not help but feel just a little bit last night like, man, there's no receiver play here really that is going to give Duke fits. There's nobody here in crunch time that you're like, hey, give him a shot one-on-one. There's no Keon Coleman type player. Now, that's not to say that Keon Coleman is just walking around in every other football program across the country. I understand he's a one-of-one. But the reality is you needed some more dynamic talent last night if you're Clemson, and you didn't have that. There is no way in the world Clemson should be losing to Duke based on how they've recruited. Clemson's got 2 or 3 top 5 classes since 2020, okay? Since 2019 at least. Like they've been stocking the cupboard here for a while with talent. And the best metaphor I could use is they've got a lot of one kind of ingredient, especially in that skill position category. Like for me, I love hamburgers. I love hamburgers. Do I want it for every single meal? No. It doesn't allow me to grow. It doesn't make me a healthy individual. I need to have some salads, need to have some fruits and vegetables in there. Like we need to have a mix here. So I'm saying Clemson has a lot of one thing. I don't see a lot of game-breaking, speedy receivers in that room. And so the way they've built their roster here is what I think you look at if you're Clemson. I don't have a problem if you don't want to use the portal. If you don't want to use the portal, that's your prerogative because you recruit really well. But the way and the genre in which you recruit from a skill position standpoint, I think is what ended up being the deal last night. Now, there's a lot of execution errors. If they play that game 10 times, what's the result? Again, I don't think last night was a fluke, but I think Clemson shot themselves in the foot a fair amount. So my real question for Clemson isn't that they haven't used the portal. It's how are we building this roster? Does that need to be reevaluated in terms of what we're doing in that playmaker category? So that's my thoughts there. Again, I would not sell my Clemson stock just yet. I think Garrett Riley has too strong of a resume to think they won't eventually get it together. They have too much talent to not still make some noise in the ACC. But last night does not inspire a ton of confidence, to say the least. So hats off to Duke for Clemson. Don't think you are, just completely underwater. Don't think that the ship is sunk just yet. But I do think that there needs to be some reevaluation for the brand and the genre in terms of how they're recruiting and building that roster.